Serious, what's a time where trusting your gut quite literally saved your life? NSFW. I almost drove through a big patch of tall grass on my dirt bike just for fun, but at the last second hit the brakes and turned around. Didn't know why. Next time I went there, turns out there's a 75-foot cliff over a river right behind it that I would have just flew off at top speed. Because of the scenery, you couldn't tell at all looking head onto it. I still don't know what made me stop back then. My uncle and cousin were out four-wheeling with some friends and one of them wasn't as lucky as you. What we assume he thought was just gonna be a short drop ended up being a 100 feet drop that killed him. They didn't know what happened to him and spent a few hours looking for him until another group notified them of a body at a crash site. I was working in the sales office at an engineering company. I was asked to record the serial numbers off a stack of large steel plates on the shop floor. I had to get someone with crane operating experience to lift the top plate so I could read the one underneath. The guy lifted it directly upwards about 6 feet. I was just about to lean underneath the plate when a little voice inside my head said, "Don't do that, mate, get him to move the overhead plate to one side." Just as I thought that, the clamp holding the plate failed and it fell to the ground, just in front of me. It must have weighed about a ton. If it had fallen on my head, I'd have been killed instantly. My GF met up with a work friend at a bar. This girl was with a guy who gave me seriously bad vibes. He was fake friendly but his eyes were crazy. My GF didn't see it. I wasn't having it. I told her I was leaving, and she really needed to come. We fought, I left, she came running after. Next morning, we find out the guy stabbed someone in the chest and killed the guy. I straight up said I told you so. He was fucking crazy. GF's friends spent the night in holding too. I don't know if it saved my life, but it saved me one hell of a bad time. I've told this story before on another post but on an old account. My boyfriend at the time and I were house sitting for his uncle. My boyfriend was at work and I was bathing our son before bed. I had the bathroom window, facing the backyard, very slightly cracked, and heard a cough from outside. This house was in a residential neighborhood so it could have been a neighbor, but I suddenly felt anxious and scared and something told me to go make sure the back door was locked. I left my 2-year-old son alone in a towel in the bathroom and ran to the back door. As I placed my hand on the doorknob locking it, I came face to face with someone through the glass, who had his hand on the outside doorknob. He started pounding on the door and juggling the doorknob saying he was looking for someone and I just told him no, they're not here. He kept jiggling the doorknob and I ran to my son and grabbed my cell phone to call for help. Remember him house sitting though, and this was in 2004-2005 when they had those flip open phones, not a smartphone where you can just look at a map. So I had no idea what the address was, or where the house phone was. Anyways, I call 911 from the bathroom on my cell, while hearing loud pounding on the back door. The dispatchers tells me to find a house phone, piece of mail, anything with address. I locate the house phone and call 911 from that. So have no idea how police got there so quickly, but just as I hear the back door glass break, the guy on the phone tells me to cover my son's head with a blanket and run out the front door into the back seat of the police car. I ran out the front door and saw 6 or more police cars all with guns drawn and straight into the waiting cruiser. After they arrested the guy, they asked me if the machete on the back porch belonged to the owners of the house. The guy had a machete and had I not trusted my gut that the cough sounded a little too close, and to check the back door, he would have walked right into an unlocked house to a 19-year-old female and her young son alone. Turns out he had been robbing houses and had a backpack full of stolen things, and was high on meth. Anyways, super glad so followed my gut on that one. One time I was hiking after a storm and my intuition told me to freeze. I listened and a large tree just fell down across the trail in front of me, right where I would have been if I didn't stop. Things like that make me wonder if some humans have a similar ability to the one that lets dogs know if there will be a storm, or earthquake long before it happens. I had gotten my first black lab. He was about 10 months old when we went to a local park early in the morning to walk the trails. We had just finished a long trail and were resting. I was sitting on a bench. My dog's hair stood up and he started to growl. When I looked up, I saw a man walking towards me. His eyes didn't look right. I knew he was high. When my dog growled, he stopped. He gave a smirky smile and asked if my dog would bite. I told him he definitely would if the guy came any closer. He hesitated for a moment, and then he turned and walked away. To this day I am certain he meant to harm me. If I hadn't trusted my dog, I hate to think what would have happened. I gave him lots of hugs and treats that day. He died many years ago, but I think of him often. And I believe that when I cross over, he will be there waiting for me. He was the best dog I ever had, I still love and miss him greatly. When I was 10, I was walking to my friend's house. A van stopped me to ask for directions to the park. A man was driving and a woman was passenger, and she's the one who spoke to me. We had been taught in school, and by my parents, that adults should never ask kids for directions. In school, they told us if anyone ever stops you, take a giant step back before running away, so they can't grab you. So I take a step back and tell them I don't know where the park is. The lady said, "I can hear you, come closer," and I knew in my gut something was wrong. Out of fear, I almost listened to her, but then the sliding door on the van started to open and I took off running faster than I've ever ran in my life. Ran all the way to my friend's house. I told her parents everything and they called my parents and the police. The police came to her house and talked to me and said that 2 other kids in our neighborhood reported the same van stopping and trying to talk to them. It was weird because before the van even stopped beside me, I had this sick feeling in my gut. As soon as it started rolling down the street, I knew something bad was about to happen. It was a couple of months before I had the guts to walk to my friend's house again. It was my mom's gut feeling for me. I was always an A student, skipped a grade, good kid, she knew all of my friends. I asked to go on a small road trip with a friend my senior year to see a college plus go to a party there the friend knew about. Mama agreed, I'd never given her trouble. Suddenly, like on Thursday or Friday before the weekend trip, she just says, "No, I don't want you to go. It doesn't feel right." I'm like, WTF? I want to have fun with my friends. Why not? No reason besides no. I'm so furious at her as my friend leaves and I know she'll have so much fun with cute college boys and touring the campus. She barely made it an hour away and her car was T-boned by a truck, destroying the passenger side where I would have been and died. Maybe not saved my life story, but totally saved my siblings and me from bad things for sure. When I was a teen, around 15-ish maybe 16-ish, mother was dating this cool guy. To mother he was a catch, he was built cause he would wrestle in the Mexican lucha libre, like WWE type of wrestling, he was very friendly and charismatic. However, I never liked him. I'm the oldest sister and was parentified, so I was like the mother to my sibs. I was in charge of all their everythings. To this day my youngest bro, who is 32, loves to tease my son by telling him that my bro is my first son and my son is second to him. Anyway, this man just always made my skin crawl and my gut would just go crazy when he was around. I would fight with mother constantly cause she would get mad that I didn't comply and I would always keep my siblings away. I would make sure to be mean and annoying and just be a complete asshole to him and mom when he was around. He left her after a few months and she blamed me for it. A few months later his picture was in the local news. He was arrested for pedophilia and child trafficking. I remember yelling at mother and pointing my finger at her and telling her I knew it, he was a bad man. You didn't believe me. Thanks to me my siblings weren't his next victims. A couple of years ago, we had a ton of snow and a delayed spring. When the snow finally started to melt, it was very rapid. So much that some areas had little creeks forming. My dad and I were on a walk on a trail and stopped to admire a culvert that got torn apart by the newly formed river. A large tree had already fallen down onto the path because the ground had completely eroded at the base. I was looking at another tree near the riverbank and thought it was likely going to fall in a day or two. That tree is going to fall too, I bet, I told him. I watched it swaying slightly for a moment. Then it stopped swaying, and I just stared at it for a couple seconds before I went into full panic. Oh shit, run. Run. We just ran without looking back while several trees all started coming down in a chain reaction. The tree I was mesmerized by struck right where we were standing. I think my brain realized that the tree stopped swaying because it was starting to fall down. I was driving home from a friend's house late one night. I was probably 16 to 17 years old and had a Mustang, so I was getting it down a back road when I heard this loud "slow down now" in my head, louder than the music I had cranked up. I immediately slowed down to well below the speed limit, and when I came around the next turn there was a train coming across the unmarked tracks. There were warning signs about the tracks. I knew they were there as I had traveled that road many times, but there were no lights or crossarms and I had never seen a train on those tracks before. Add that to the fact that there are woods on either side of the road, so it would be almost impossible to know if a train was coming at night. Back in 2012 I was living in Spain with my best friend whilst we studied Spanish. One evening, we were feeling sluggish and a bit off after eating dinner. We barely made it through half a movie before we looked at each other and discussed whether we were becoming sick, and should just call it an early evening and head to bed. We quickly got ready for bed, feeling sickish, and I was turning off the lights in the living room when I had a light bulb moment of checking out the gas. But we were using a gas stove where you had to turn the gas thingy on and off upon using the stove itself. We never used this in our home country, so we were just getting used to it. Turns out the gas was still on after we turned the stove off after cooking, and it was leaking gas into the small apartment we lived in, the entire evening. If we would have gone to sleep, we would have never woken up again. When I was in my late teens/early 20s, I was with a girlfriend at a club. Met some guys who said there was a party they were throwing. I was driving, so I figured it couldn't hurt to check it out. Get to a hotel room and it's just us two girls with at least 4 guys. I already felt something bad would happen, but decided to drink as much of their booze before bugging out. I remember quite vividly standing at the mini fridge and my friend was sitting on one of the 2 beds. She was holding one beer and talking about how drunk she was. "OMG, I'm so drunk," and no sooner than she starts saying this, these guys started moving in on her like a group of hyenas going in for the kill. I immediately knew we had to GTFO. I just walked over to her and told her I needed to talk to her outside and grabbed her by the wrist and kept walking down the stairs from the hotel door. She fought me the entire time and I had to scream at her to get in the car. By the time the guys figured out we were leaving, they were at the door of their room throwing things at my car. I know I saved my friend from a gang rape and she didn't want to leave. She never thanked me. I was working for an oil field company and we were doing some maintenance on a hydraulic pump jack. I had to be lifted in a basket about 20 feet in the air by the crane I was working on and loosen a couple of nuts so we could remove a part to lift some components. Once I got up there I took my hard hat off because it was so hot out and I figured, hey, what could possibly drop on my head when I'm higher up than anything around me? I loosened the first nut and then thought about how mad my mom would be. She's a nurse and never really liked me working in the oil field because of how dangerous it was, so I put my hard hat back on. When I loosened the last nut the pump jack shot up because the operator hadn't depressurized like he said he had. This massive nut flew straight up in the air and before I could figure out what was happening it landed square on my hard hat. The force made me drop to my knees. The guy operating the crane saw me drop and immediately lowered the basket to the ground. I walked away with a kink in my neck and a huge dent in my hard hat. I often think about what would have happened if I hadn't put it back on. Thanks, Mom. My stepchild's ex got into a car motorcycle crash. He was bad about not wearing his helmet, and the only thing that saved his life was his mom's voice in his head. She was also a nurse, as he was getting ready to take off, telling him to stop and put it on. For whatever reason, he listened. He was deboned just a couple minutes later, and survived, though he was in a coma for days and nearly lost a leg.